My name is Mary. I'm 69 years old, and for as long as I can remember, Easter has been my favorite time of year. Not because of the dresses, not even because of the church services, although I do enjoy seeing the children in their little suits and bonnets, so full of energy and sugar. No, Easter is special to me because it's about rebirth, about hope, about traditions that quietly outlast all the things that change in life. I live in a small yellow house on Hawthorne Lane, alone now, ever since my husband, Edward, passed away 6 years ago. I still talk to him sometimes, mostly when I'm weeding the garden or setting the table for one. I suppose that's how I stay grounded, by pretending that my voice, even if it's only echoing off the refrigerator, still has someone listening on the other end. My daughter Alice lives just a few streets over, in one of those sleek new duplexes with the gravel landscaping and smart thermostats. She's 38, busy, important. Her husband Greg works in finance, and their son, my grandson Ben, is 8, always running from one extracurricular to another, like he's got a board meeting at recess. I see them, of course, on birthdays, holidays, sometimes when Alice needs a babysitter or someone to sign for a package, but it's not like it used to be. You know what I mean, right? When they're little, they come running to you for everything: boo-boos, cookies, bedtime stories. Then one day they don't. One day they look at you like your ways are outdated, your opinions are optional, and your efforts are quaint. But still, every Easter, I dye eggs. I do it the way my mother taught me, and her mother before her. I use onion skins, red cabbage, turmeric, and beet juice. I wrap each egg in bits of lace and leaves from the yard, boil them gently with vinegar, and when they cool, they come out like little jewels. Everyone different. They smell of earth and vinegar and spring. They hold memories in their curves. When Alice was a girl, she used to love them. She'd stand on a chair beside me, dipping her little fingers in the bowls of natural dye, squealing when the eggs turned pink or blue or a muddy purple. She'd draw little hearts on them in white crayon before we dipped them, and I'd let her pick her favorites to put in the center of the basket. I kept that basket, you know. It's a simple thing: woven willow, frayed at the handle, lined with a hand-sewn cloth that still smells faintly of lavender sachets and drawer liners. Every year I pull it out of the linen closet and remember the soft weight of it on my forearm, the look of pride on Alice's face when we'd carry it into church for the blessing. It's funny, the things we hold on to. This year I took extra care. I'd been feeling low for a while. February had been cold and gray, and the house felt too quiet even for my liking. So I poured myself into the eggs. I spent a week preparing, gathering onion skins from the grocer, walking an extra block to collect fern leaves for patterns, ironing the linen cloth to line the basket. I even baked a little honey cake to go along with it. I suppose in my heart, I still hoped Alice would smile the way she used to, that maybe Ben would sit next to me and ask how the colors work, that they'd taste the cake and say it reminded them of home. I wore my best blouse that morning, ivory with pearl buttons, the one Edward always liked. I brushed my hair until it shone, slipped on my earrings, and held the basket like an offering. I hadn't felt so full of purpose in a long time. But that's the thing about expectations. They set you up for the fall, and I was about to fall hard. The sun was just beginning to cast a soft golden hue across the quiet Sunday streets when I left the house. I had tied a thin satin ribbon around the basket's handle, light green, like new shoots in spring, and covered the eggs with a fine mesh cloth, both to protect them and to keep their beauty a little surprise. The honey cake, wrapped in wax paper and nestled between two linen napkins, gave off a sweet, warm scent as I walked. It was just after 8 when I reached Alice's place. I knew they wouldn't be heading to church this year. They didn't go anymore, not since Greg got spiritual but not religious. As he put it, but I thought maybe we could have breakfast together. Maybe Ben would help me set the table like he did last year. Maybe Alice would make that special Easter coffee with cardamom she liked. Her front yard was so different from mine. Crisp, neat, no tulips or daffodils, just gravel and two symmetrical bushes trimmed like cubes. I stepped onto the porch and rang the bell, straightening my back, my blouse, the cloth on the basket. The bell echoed inside. I waited. Alice opened the door in leggings and a loose sweater. Her hair was tied in a rushed bun. She wasn't smiling. "Hi, Mom," she said. Her voice was tight. "What's this?" I held the basket up slightly, just a bit, the way you might offer a bouquet to a friend. "Happy Easter, darling. I made the eggs. And a honey cake? Thought I'd stop by before breakfast." She looked down at the basket as if it were a bucket of mud. "Oh, Mom, we got everything from the organic store yesterday. These look—" She made a face, like the eggs had grown legs. "This is kind of country trash. You didn't have to go to all that trouble." And just like that, something in me shattered. The words didn't come loudly. She didn't yell, but they hit harder than if she had. Country trash. That's what she said. I stared at her, not knowing whether to cry or laugh or pretend I hadn't heard. My fingers tightened around the handle, knuckles going white. I, I started, but she was already pulling the door closer. "We have guests coming. It's just not the vibe. Maybe just take those home." And then the door clicked softly shut, not slammed. That might have hurt less. I stood on the porch for a moment, stunned. The wind picked up and fluttered the edge of the cloth over the eggs. I looked down at them, so bright, so lovingly made. I had brought something from the heart, and she'd turned it away like leftovers. I walked home slowly, one step at a time, the way you do after a funeral. The neighborhood was waking up, children squealing with plastic eggs, neighbors laughing, but I felt like I was underwater, muffled and distant. When I got home, I set the basket on the kitchen table. The eggs gleamed in the morning sun, each one patterned delicately with leaves and lace. They were beautiful, and I couldn't stop staring at them. My chest felt tight and my eyes burned, but I didn't cry. Instead, I just sat in silence for minutes, maybe hours. The ticking of the wall clock was the only sound, and then I whispered aloud, as if Edward were listening from the next room. "She called them trash." And the silence that followed was the loneliest sound I had ever known. I don't remember how long I sat at the kitchen table. The sun had moved from the east-facing window to the west, casting long shadows through the lace curtains. The eggs remained untouched. I hadn't eaten, hadn't drunk anything. The coffee I'd brewed that morning was now cold in the pot, the scent of honey cake still lingering faintly in the air. But all I could smell was the sharp sting of rejection. That phrase, country trash, kept repeating itself in my head like a broken record. It wasn't just the words, though they had been cruel. It was the ease with which she said them, the unthinking dismissal, the way she didn't look twice, the way her eyes, those eyes I had memorized since they opened for the first time in the hospital room, reflected nothing but mild annoyance. I kept wondering, when did I become an embarrassment to my own child? It's not like I had expected applause. I didn't imagine a celebration. But maybe, just maybe, I had hoped for that same look she gave me when she was 5 and I placed the basket in her hands for the Easter parade. That awe, that joy. But that little girl was gone, replaced by a woman who saw lace-wrapped eggs as an aesthetic offense. Eventually, I rose, my body stiff, and carried the basket to the dining room sideboard. I didn't want to look at it anymore, not because I was ashamed of what I made, but because it reminded me of how invisible I'd become. I set it down gently, adjusted the cloth, and walked away. I passed the mirror in the hallway and paused. My reflection stared back at me, creased, weary. The blouse I had carefully ironed looked limp now, and the pearl buttons seemed too small, too delicate for such a day. I noticed a smudge of pink dye on my wrist from the beet juice, a faint reminder of the work that went into those eggs, a faint reminder that I had once been full of color and purpose. When Edward died, the world dimmed, but I had carried on. I had found small rituals to make life meaningful: the garden, the baking, the holidays, even when celebrated alone, gave structure to the days. But now I felt something even heavier than grief. I felt irrelevant, and that, more than anything, broke my heart. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed with the curtains open, watching the moon drift across the sky. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face at the door, her lip curling as she looked at the basket. I tried to rewrite the moment in my mind, imagined a softer response, a kinder tone, but the reality kept intruding. Around 2 a.m., I got up and wandered the house. I passed the photos on the wall: Alice as a baby in my arms, Alice in her graduation gown, Alice and Greg on their wedding day. I stopped at each one, tracing the frames with my fingers. She had been a bright, loving child. Headstrong, yes, but affectionate. So, what had changed? I sat down at my desk and pulled out the old photo albums. I flipped through them slowly, Easter after Easter. Photos of Alice with dyed fingers, laughing with eggs in her apron, Edward holding her up so she could reach the high branches where we used to hang decorative shells. She had loved those days. I hadn't imagined that. Was it the city that changed her? Her job? Her marriage? Or had I failed somewhere along the way? A tear slid down my cheek and landed on a photo. I wiped it away quickly, ashamed even in solitude. I closed the album and sat back. The clock struck 3. I walked to the kitchen, made tea. As I waited for the kettle to boil, I stood in front of the eggs again. They were still beautiful. I lifted one gently, a pale lavender egg with a delicate fern imprint. The pattern had come out perfectly. I remembered picking the fern, pressing it into the wet shell, wrapping the cheesecloth carefully. The care, the attention, the love. I held the egg in my palm and said softly, "You are not trash." That was the moment something in me began to shift. Because her words hurt. Yes, but they did not erase the work of my hands. They did not diminish the time, the love, the tradition. They did not turn beauty into garbage. And perhaps, I thought, if she could not see that, then others might. It was not a plan yet, not a rebellion, just a spark of defiance. I drank my tea slowly and watched the sun rise again. The second sunrise in a row I had watched alone. By noon, I was out in the garden. I didn't feel rested, but I needed to move. I pulled weeds, dead-headed tulips, raked leaves along the fence. My body ached, but I welcomed it. The ache reminded me I was still alive, still useful. Later that afternoon, I opened my recipe book, an old leather-bound volume with faded pages and handwritten notes in the margins. I flipped to the section marked Spring Bakes and ran my fingers down the list: honey cake, lemon shortbread, poppy seed rolls. I went into the pantry, then the fridge. I still had enough flour, sugar, and eggs, enough to make a small batch of each. I didn't tell myself why I was doing it, but something in me had begun to resist disappearing. I baked late into the evening, the kitchen filled with warm smells: lemon zest, toasted seeds, golden honey. I laid the pastries out to cool, the same way I used to before Alice's school bake sales. I even used the old lace doilies Edward's mother had crocheted, the ones I hadn't touched in years. When I was done, I looked around at the mess: flour on the counter, bowls stacked in the sink, a smear of jam on the towel, and smiled for the first time that day. Because this was who I was, not perfect, not fancy, not store bought, but real, and maybe that still mattered to someone. The next morning, I packed everything up in wax paper and twine. I didn't know where I was going with it yet. Maybe to the neighbors, maybe to the church, or maybe somewhere I hadn't yet considered. But I knew one thing: I wasn't going to hide anymore, and I would never again apologize for the things I made with love. The morning after my silent epiphany, I awoke with the kind of clarity that comes only after a storm. When all the branches have fallen, the air smells like wet earth, and you can finally see the shape of things as they really are. The truth, I realized, wasn't that I was old-fashioned or that my eggs were country trash. The truth was, I had stopped asking whether what I offered had value. I had started assuming quietly, over the years, that if something wasn't polished, modern, or approved by others, it didn't matter. But it did matter, and I didn't want to be ashamed anymore. I moved through the house slowly, but with a purpose. The laundry sat unfolded in the basket. I left it. The dishes in the sink could wait. Today was not a day for routine. Today was a day for reclamation. I returned to the dining room and looked at the basket once again. The eggs were still there, vibrant as ever. Beside them, the pastries from the night before waited under their covers of wax paper and cloth. My eyes lingered on them with something like pride. I pulled out a small notebook from the drawer and sat at the kitchen table. For the first time in years, I began to plan something that wasn't for Alice, that wasn't tied to holidays or grandchild schedules. Something for myself. A list. Farmer's market, Saturday mornings. Items to sell. Naturally dyed eggs. Honey cake. Lemon cookies. Pickled vegetables. Materials. Labels. Tags. Basket covers. Folding table, name, Mary's table, eggs and roots, home by hand. The list grew longer than I expected. The more I wrote, the more I remembered how capable I still was. Organization had always been my quiet skill. Planning parties, Sunday school fundraisers, Edward's retirement dinner. I had always taken joy in details. Now I poured that same energy into something new. The idea of going to the farmer's market had come to me in the small hours before dawn. I'd walked past it countless times before, the row of tents and tables filled with jams, candles, fresh produce, and handmade crafts. It had always seemed like something for other people, younger people, more modern people. But hadn't I spent my life making things with my hands? Why shouldn't my work have a place there too? That afternoon, I called the number listed for vendor inquiries. A cheerful woman named Kathy picked up. She told me there was one spot left for the season. A small one, but available. I asked what the process was. She said, "Just show up Saturday morning by 8 with your goods. We provide the table." My heart fluttered. I thanked her and wrote it down in careful print. I spent the rest of the week preparing. I boiled eggs in small batches, testing new patterns: wildflower petals, sage leaves, bits of lace and embroidery. I experimented with turmeric and paprika, trying to find just the right golden hue. I baked in the afternoons when the sun warmed the kitchen: lemon poppy seed cookies, honey cakes in small, loaf-sized tins. I even labeled everything with recycled tags from an old craft box. I didn't tell anyone, not Alice, not the neighbors. It wasn't secrecy, it was something else. It was mine. On Friday evening, I ironed my blouse, set my apron aside, and packed the goods into clean baskets lined with cotton cloth. I tied twine around each one, the way bakers used to in the shops back when I was a girl. I stood in the doorway that night, looking out at the moon, and I whispered aloud to Edward, "I'm doing something brave tomorrow. I hope you'd be proud." The wind answered with a gentle rustle through the lilac bushes. That night, for the first time in several days, I slept well, and in the morning, I carried my work into the world. It was still dark when I stepped out the door that Saturday. The sky hung low and purple over the rooftops, and the street lamps cast long silver reflections on the dew-slick pavement. My breath rose in little clouds as I made my way down Hawthorne Lane with a rolling cart that Edward once used for his tools. Now it held my baskets, tightly packed, each one blanketed in cloth. The town square was waking slowly, tents being raised, tables unfolded, the scent of brewing coffee and fresh bread beginning to creep through the morning air. I found my spot easily. It was at the far end, near a lamppost wrapped in ivy and next to an elderly man selling beeswax candles. "First time?" he asked as I laid out my cloth. "Yes," I said, trying to steady my voice. "Good spot." He nodded. "The light hits here nice when the sun comes up." I smiled politely and began to set up. I'd brought 2 baskets of naturally dyed eggs, each nestled in softwood shavings and labeled by color: sun gold, turmeric; twilight blue, red cabbage; rose blush, beets. I arranged them in rows like precious stones. The honey cakes went on the right, tied with ribbon and a small label that read, "Baked with raw honey and heart." On the left, lemon poppy seed cookies in cellophane with handwritten tags. No branding, no gimmicks, just my handwriting and my hands behind it all. By 8:30, the market began to hum with life. People strolled slowly, sipping coffee, pushing strollers, tugging dogs on leashes. I kept my posture straight, smiled at everyone who passed. The first customer was a woman in her 60s with silver curls and bright green glasses. She leaned over the eggs, her eyes lighting up. "Oh my, are these naturally dyed?" "They are," I said, "using old methods, onion skins, cabbage, turmeric." She picked up a lavender blue one and held it to the light. "This is art, absolute art." She bought 6 eggs, 2 cakes, and 3 packs of cookies. She didn't haggle, didn't question, just smiled and said, "You're gonna sell out, you know." I blinked. "I hope so," I replied softly. And she was right. People began coming by steadily, some drawn by the colors, others by the smell of the cakes. One young couple asked how I got the patterns so delicate. I showed them a photo on my phone: fern leaves pressed against eggs, wrapped in cloth. They took 2 dozen. By 10 o'clock, I had only 1 basket of eggs left. A woman with a toddler bought all the cookies. A man in a wide-brimmed hat said the honey cake reminded him of his grandmother. Another couple asked if I taught workshops. Workshops. Each time someone picked up a piece of my work and admired it, I felt something in me rise, a feeling I hadn't had in years. Not pride exactly, something deeper: dignity. By noon, I was nearly empty. The old man next to me offered half his sandwich. We sat together on folding chairs, chewing quietly. He asked about my family, and I told him I had a daughter nearby. "She must be proud," he said. I only nodded. The day closed with handshakes and warm words. Kathy, the organizer, came by with a clipboard and said, "Mary, would you like to make this a weekly thing? We've got a few people already asking about you." "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Yes, I'd love that." I packed up my empty basket slowly, savoring every movement. My fingers were sore, my back ached, but my spirit? My spirit felt light. As I walked back home, I passed a playground where children were giggling and chasing each other with toy bunnies and plastic eggs. For a brief moment, I imagined Alice there, years ago, in a pink dress, running with dyed fingers and grass in her shoes. But I didn't let the memory sink too deep. Not today. Today was not about what I'd lost. Today was about what I still had to give. A month passed like the turning of a page. Every Saturday, I returned to the farmer's market with my baskets of dyed eggs and fresh baked goods. And every Saturday, I left with less than I'd brought, sometimes with nothing at all. People started recognizing me. I was no longer just the lady with the eggs. Now they called me Mary. They asked about the dyes, about the honey. A teenage girl from the high school interviewed me for a school project on local artisans. One man, who ran a blog on sustainable living, featured my eggs in a full-length post titled Beauty in the Ordinary, The Art of Mary's Easter Eggs. The comments rolled in. I wish I lived closer. I would love to learn her method. This is exactly the kind of thing we need more of in this world. I printed the post and pinned it on the bulletin board in my kitchen, right next to Ben's old drawing of a duck and a sun. My eggs became something people talked about. People posted them on social media. Even outside of Easter season, folks came for them because they weren't just about the holiday. They were a symbol of care, of slowness, of beauty made by hand. And with every compliment, every dollar exchanged, I felt a small stitch mend in my heart. One day in the middle of June, I had just finished stacking my trays at the end of the market when Kathy came over with a paper cup of lemonade. You've become something of a sensation, she said, smiling. I have? I asked, not sure if she was joking. She held up her phone and showed me a photo, my table, my hands holding a basket, a caption beneath it. Mary's eggs are a reminder that the best things in life take time. People want to feel connected again, Kathy said. You help them do that. I looked at the photo, then back at her. My hands looked old in the picture, lined and knotted, but beautiful too, like hands that had worked, made things, given love. That night, I made extra lemon cookies and wrapped a small box in floral paper. I added a note, for Alice, just because. I walked the 2 blocks to her house and left it on her porch. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't want another door closed in my face. I just wanted her to know, quietly, that I still thought of her. The next morning, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Alice, standing there with the box in her hands. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she clutched the cookies like they were something precious. I didn't know they were yours, she said. Her voice was hoarse. The eggs, the cookies. Mom, I didn't know. I stepped back and let her in, motioned for her to sit. She looked around the kitchen, the neat counters, the half-finished basket of eggs on the table, the smell of lemon and sugar still in the air. I saw them online, she said, glancing down. People were raving. Then I saw the picture, you, and her voice broke. I stood by the window, hands folded. You knew? I said gently. Maybe not right away, but you did know. You just didn't want to see. She flinched, but I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her. I wasn't angry anymore. But now, I said, now others have seen, and that's made all the difference. She looked up at me then, really looked, like she hadn't in years, and I saw the girl she used to be, peeking out from behind the polished adult exterior. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know, I said, and then, just like that, the silence between us became something else, not empty, not full, but open. She stayed for tea. We didn't talk much more about the market, or the eggs, or even the cookies. We talked about Ben, about her job, about the heat wave and how the lilacs were blooming late, but every word felt like a new stitch in something we'd both let fray for too long. And for the first time in years, I let myself hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back. By the middle of July, the Saturday market had become a rhythm as natural to me as the rising sun. I'd begun to experiment with new recipes, lavender scones, rosemary crackers, even homemade butter in little mason jars. But still, the dyed eggs remained the heart of it all. People now came by not just to buy, but to talk. I'd heard stories about lost grandmothers, family traditions, and how my eggs reminded someone of a spring they'd spent in Italy as a child. One woman brought me a jar of wildflower honey from her own bees, saying it was a fair exchange for something beautiful. Every week, Kathy made a point to stop by with updates. "You're in this month's community newsletter," she told me one day, "and we've had 3 inquiries about your baking classes." It all felt like a gentle current, carrying me forward. I no longer felt small or discarded. And then came the morning of the unexpected encounter. It was a Saturday like any other. The air was thick with the scent of peaches and baked bread. I had my usual setup: baskets lined with gingham cloth, samples of honey cake, and rows of gleaming eggs nestled in straw. I was tying a ribbon on a wrapped loaf when I heard the familiar click of expensive heels behind me. A voice I hadn't heard in years, not in that particular tone, spoke, light and amused. "Are these the famous eggs everyone's talking about?" I turned. Alice. She stood there in a crisp summer dress, sunglasses perched atop her head, holding Ben's hand. 2 of her friends stood just behind her, one of them already reaching for an egg. Ben's eyes lit up when he saw me. "Grandma," he said, breaking free and wrapping his arms around me. My hands instinctively found his back, holding him tight. Alice froze for a second, then gave a tight smile. "These are your eggs," she said, her voice lower now. "The ones at the market?" I nodded. "Yes, every Saturday." Her friend chimed in. "Alice has been talking about these eggs for weeks. Said they're the prettiest and best tasting in town. We made deviled eggs with them for book club." Alice's cheeks turned the faintest pink. I looked at her gently. "I'm glad you liked them." She didn't answer immediately. She looked down at the basket, fingers brushing over the edges of one egg, patterned with Queen Anne's lace. "They really are beautiful," she said finally. Ben beamed. "Mom says they're magic eggs." I laughed softly, brushing his hair back. "Only if you eat them with joy." Her friends continued chatting, buying cookies, complimenting the setup. Alice lingered back, half present, half absent. Before she left, she reached into her tote and placed a folded 20 on the table. "For the cake," she said, her voice quiet. "And for the rest." I didn't touch the bill. Instead, I looked at her, really looked, past the polished exterior, past the sunglasses and lip gloss and manicured fingernails. I saw the girl who once dyed eggs beside me, who used to draw stars on them in white crayon, who used to hide them in the tulip beds for Edward to find. "Take it with you," I said. "This one's a gift." She hesitated, then gave the smallest of nods. Her fingers brushed the basket's edge one more time, and then she was gone. But as she walked away, I saw her glance back twice, and I knew that something in her had shifted. Not everything, not completely, but enough, enough to start. It happened on a Tuesday, not a holiday, not a special occasion, just an ordinary summer evening when the breeze through the maple trees cooled the sidewalks and the neighbors watered their flower beds in unison. The kind of evening when life slows down enough to let long dormant things rise to the surface. I had just finished folding the laundry and was setting the kettle to boil when I heard the knock. 3 soft raps, familiar, hesitant. I opened the door, and there she was, Alice, not dressed up, not hurried. She wore jeans and a faded chambray shirt, her hair loosely tied back, no makeup, no armor. In her hands was a small paper bag, crinkled at the top. "Hi," she said, her voice uncertain. "Hi," I replied. We stood like that for a moment, 2 women who had once been everything to each other, now separated by years of tension, misunderstandings, and a single sentence that had bruised deeper than either of us expected. "I brought lemon balm tea," she said, holding the bag up like an offering. "I remember it used to help when you couldn't sleep." I stepped aside and let her in. We didn't speak as I put the kettle back on. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon and soap. She sat at the table, fingers laced, eyes flicking over the room like she was memorizing it again. "It's just the same," she said softly. "You haven't changed anything." "I like what I have," I said. "It's quiet, but it's mine." She nodded and said nothing more until I placed two mugs on the table and sat across from her. For a long time, we just sipped in silence. Then she exhaled slowly and looked up. "Mom, I owe you more than just an apology." I waited. She didn't rush. She stared into her tea like it held the words she hadn't yet dared to say. "I thought I was protecting myself," she said, "by building this life, by keeping things curated, clean, controlled. I thought maybe if everything looked perfect, I could be perfect too." I didn't interrupt. I let the tea warm my hands, let her words come. "I didn't realize that in the process I was shutting you out, or worse, looking down on you. I never meant to make you feel small, never meant for that word, trash, to fall out of my mouth like that." She winced at her own memory. It came from somewhere ugly in me. From shame, probably. Shame that I couldn't make it all work the way I thought I should. Shame that I had to ask you for help sometimes. And then, when I saw those eggs at the market, when I realized everyone else could see their worth so clearly, I felt ashamed all over again. But this time, for what I'd said, for what I'd missed. The quiet in the room was full, not tense, not awkward, just full, like a wound breathing. "I don't want to pretend it didn't happen," she continued, "because it did, and I need you to know I'm sorry, truly, not just because I got caught, or because others saw what I didn't, but because I hurt you, and I hate that I did." I reached across the table and touched her hand. "I know," I said. She looked up then, her eyes glassy. "I guess I just wanted you to be someone else sometimes, someone who fit into the world I was trying to build. And I wanted you to be the little girl with the crayon hearts again," I replied gently. "But we don't get to freeze time, do we?" She gave a sad little laugh. "Number We don't." We sat in that stillness again, two women no longer pretending, just being. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "I've started saving your posts," she said, "the ones people tag you in. I follow the market's page now. I read all the comments." I smiled faintly. "They've been kind. They've been more than kind," she said. "They've seen you. In a way I should have." Her voice caught. She wiped her cheek quickly, embarrassed. "I'm still learning how to see things, to slow down. Greg doesn't get it. He thinks I've gotten soft. But Ben asked me last week if we could dye eggs at home." My heart fluttered. "And?" I asked. I told him yes. I told him we'd do it your way, with onion skins and ferns and a little patience. I closed my eyes for a second, breathing in that moment like perfume. "You're welcome to bring him here," I said. "Any time." She smiled. "I'd like that." We didn't solve everything that night. There were still hurts, still edges, still things to be said in the future. But the wall between us had cracked, and through it, the first green shoots of understanding were reaching for the light. When she left, she hugged me. Not politely, not briefly. She held me, and I held her right back. I stood at the doorway after she'd gone, watching the moon rise through the trees. In the silence that followed, I whispered aloud to the night. She saw me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole again. Time didn't rush after that evening. It unfolded, slowly, quietly, as if to allow us space to adjust to the new shape of things. Nothing grand or cinematic happened. No big speeches or public declarations. Just life continuing, like water smoothing over a stone. Alice didn't show up every day, nor did I expect her to. but she came more often than she had in years. Sometimes she brought Ben, bounding in with dirt on his shoes and joy in his step. Sometimes it was just her, standing quietly on the porch with something in her hands, a jar of jam, a folded dishcloth, a question she wasn't sure how to ask. Each visit felt like a step, not toward a dramatic reconciliation, but toward something simpler, something real, something steady. She came with questions, too, about the dyes, the baking, the old traditions I'd carried forward. She asked how to dry herbs properly, how long eggs had to steep in beet dye for the rich purple tone, and whether my honey cake recipe used clover honey or wildflower. At first, she asked as if she were still an outsider peeking through the window of a life she had once known. But soon she started rolling up her sleeves. We dyed eggs together in mid-August, though there was no holiday to mark. We did it just because Ben asked to, and because she said she wanted to learn the right way. I let her wrap the cabbage leaves and secure them with old stockings, just like I used to. Her hands were awkward at first, fumbling the strings, but they grew more confident with each egg. The colors turned out beautifully. She took a photo of them laid out on the counter, light falling across their marbled shells. She looked over at me while I stirred the pot of beet dye and said, I used to think your way was too slow. Now I think maybe mine was just too fast. That stayed with me, not just because of the words, but because she had meant them. Greg didn't visit. I didn't ask. I sensed things were strained, but Alice didn't bring it up, and I didn't press. Our connection was growing again, and I didn't want to risk smothering it with too many questions. Ben started coming by more regularly after school. He liked the garden, especially the cherry tomatoes and the mint patch. I showed him how to harvest lavender and hang it to dry. We planted nasturtiums together, and he insisted on watering them himself, even naming them. We baked muffins on Thursdays. He liked to crack the eggs, spill a little flour, and taste the batter when he thought I wasn't looking. And each time he hugged me goodbye, he said, Love you, Grandma. See you soon. My heart, once bruised and shriveled from rejection, began to feel whole again, not because Alice had said all the right things, but because her actions were quieter and stronger than words. She listened more. She helped clean up after baking. She watered my flowers without asking. She even refolded the laundry basket I'd left out, without a word, just because it was there. And she sat with me, sometimes saying nothing at all. We watched the birds at the feeder, the wind through the trees. Silence had stopped feeling like a void and started feeling like companionship. Once, in early September, I caught her humming while dusting off one of the market baskets. It was a tune my mother used to hum. I don't know how Alice remembered it, but somehow it lived in her still. She stopped mid-note and smiled, a little shy. I forgot I knew that, she said. She started bringing her own offerings, too. A jar of her homemade granola, a framed photo of Ben holding one of my eggs, a small hand cream she thought I'd like because it smells like your linen drawer, a bundle of wildflowers she found near the creek, tied with a bit of ribbon. None of it was grand, but all of it mattered. It felt like grace, not forgiveness, not forgetting, but an acceptance of the complicated love between mothers and daughters, a love that isn't perfect but persists, a love that remembers even when it forgets, that stretches, shrinks, frays, but doesn't break. I still went to the market. I still dyed eggs and baked and wore my apron like armor and ritual. But now sometimes Alice came with me. She stood behind the table, served the cookies, explained the dyeing process. She talked to people, our neighbors, the regulars, and I could see how much she was trying. Not to perform, but to connect. One Saturday, I overheard her telling a customer, My mom makes these the old-fashioned way, all natural. There's nothing quite like them. She said it not like someone proud of a novelty, but like someone proud of a legacy. And that, I think, was the real change. She no longer saw me as an extra piece of the past. She saw me as a part of her present. It wasn't always smooth. Some days she would still go quiet. Some conversations slipped into old patterns. She still bristled sometimes when I gave advice, and I still caught myself wishing she'd call before she arrived. But the difference now was that we stayed in the room together. We stayed in the moment. We didn't retreat from each other at the first sign of friction. We stayed, and that, after everything, was enough. It was everything. The next Easter came early that year. The daffodils bloomed ahead of schedule, pushing up through patches of lingering snow like small yellow proclamations that winter had finally given way. I woke before dawn and sat alone in the kitchen. A fresh pot of coffee steamed beside me, and the old willow basket lay ready on the table. It was just as I remembered it, slightly frayed at the handle, faintly scented with lavender sachets, lined with the cloth my mother had embroidered decades ago. This year, I dyed the eggs slowly, patiently, letting each one soak until it took on the perfect hue. I worked quietly, almost meditatively, taking extra care. But not for praise, not even for Alice. It was for the ritual, the rhythm, the memory of hands that had taught me, and the strength I had found in carrying them forward. It was for myself. When the light finally softened the sky into a tender peach, I wrapped the eggs in linen, tied a soft ribbon around the basket's curved handle, and nestled a warm honey cake beneath the cloth. Then I changed into my Sunday dress, the blue one with tiny printed flowers, and stepped outside. Alice's house was only 10 minutes away, and yet it felt both closer and farther than it had the year before. Familiar, but no longer fraught with hesitation. I rang the bell. The door opened before I could lower my hand. Alice stood there, already smiling. She was wearing an apron. Ben peeked out from behind her, his face lighting up. "Grandma," he cried, "you brought them." "I did," I said, smiling. "Still warm." Alice reached for the basket, not hurriedly, not casually. Her hands were careful, almost reverent. She looked down at the eggs and shook her head, the smile still touching the corners of her eyes. "Mom," she said quietly, "your eggs are now the most precious thing around this table." I looked at her, really looked. There was no performance in her voice, no irony, no hidden reservation, only warmth, only truth. "They always were," I replied softly. "It just took a little time for you to see it." She nodded, and we both stepped inside. The table was already set. Not elaborate, not curated for show, just real. There was a pitcher of lemonade, a bowl of fruit, and 3 plates neatly placed. A small vase of daffodils, freshly cut, stood in the center. Ben took one of the eggs from the basket and held it up to the light like treasure. "Can we dye some more later?" he asked. "I want to try the red kind." "We can," I said, smiling. "We absolutely can." We sat, we ate, we talked. Nothing monumental, no grand gestures, just a family gently stitching itself back together with shared food and quiet joy. Each small act, passing the bread, pouring the lemonade, listening, felt like a thread in the fabric of something new and durable. And for the first time in many years, I didn't feel like a visitor in my daughter's home. I didn't feel like an artifact from a bygone era, someone politely tolerated for tradition's sake. I felt like part of the center again. Outside, the wind moved gently through budding trees. Birds chirped. Down the street, a dog barked, and somewhere nearby, someone laughed. Life continued as it always does. But around that table, among bright hand-dyed eggs, a soft honey cake, and 3 people bound by time, effort, and grace, something had changed. Respect, once cracked and weathered, had been restored. And this time, it wasn't fragile. It was earned. and it was real.